Right, 100 kilos of grey granite chips. I've got granite because it's inert, and the background of the Juwel Rio is granite coloured, so I'm thinking it's a good match. I got this from a builder jar for 20 quid for all of this. Would have been much more if it was aquarium specific stuff from a pet shop or aquarium store. So, only problem is I've got to start washing it now, haven't I? Right, I'm just not happy with this tank, and I'll tell you what happened. When the background was blue, the sand at the bottom looked sweet, it looked really nice. But since I added the 3D background, I just don't think it's a good match, and it's been annoying me. So I started thinking the background is the dual 3D granite background. So granite is inert, and I started thinking, well, I could get granite chips for the bottom, couldn't I? And I was talking to my mate Chris Stubbs Aquatics. I'll drop his link down below. It'd be nice if you went to say hello to him. But anyway, I was chatting to him, and he says he's used granite, and it's been absolutely fine. Sent me a few pictures and everything, which was the final nudge that I needed. So we're going to swap this out now. I won't go through every single step because this video will end up an hour long, but I'll go through a lot of it, as much as I think is relevant, and we'll see what it looks like when it's done, eh? Preparation is everything, isn't it? So before we even touch the tank, we're going to do as much as we can, which means rinsing out all this gravel. And you can see it really does need rinsed out. You can see the stuff running out of it. So we've got definitely not Mrs. DKF's kitchen strainer. Don't be telling her that, will ya? And we're going to rinse all of this, which is going to take a fair while. You helping? Blink, you helping? No? Alright, I'll do it myself. Right, I've washed 75 kilos of this, and I think that's going to be enough. So I'm not going to do the other bag, and if I need to, I'll come back and do it after. But I think that's going to be plenty. Step 2, we can start getting the water out. Turn the heaters off, turn the filter off. Not a fish keeper till you've swallowed a mouthful of fish water here. I'm still a bucket guy. I don't have a Python or any kind of water change system, so I'm going to use a couple of buckets and rotate them to empty the tank as quickly as I can. Might regret that after today's work, right enough. Might have to invest in one of them, we'll see. Whilst that's happening, I can remove some of the scape, any rocks or wood or anything like that. I don't want to start pulling plants up just now because they can make a mess in the water, although admittedly less so in sand, but yeah, we'll leave that for the end, I think. I'll be interested to see if Big Bertha, this huge piece of wood here, has finally sunk. I'm not holding out too much hope, but it would be nice not to have to put these rocks back on top of it. Should mention, I suppose, if you are putting rocks on top of a bit of wood to keep it down, just make sure if it did tilt or tip, the rocks aren't going to land anywhere near the glass. You don't want to end up with them smashing through your front panel. I think we can already tell that's not the case, can't we? Look. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Oh well. Look who's made an appearance. My green phantom that I bought about 18 months ago. And this is the second time I've seen it. Anyway, we'll grab the sponge filter out now because we're going to use that. We'll give it a quick squeeze out in this waste tank water while we've got the opportunity. You see the amount of filth that's coming out of it, can't you? Eee. We're going to stick that in our storage container, which is where the fish are going to go temporarily. I did make sure that it is food grade. They're not going to be in it for long, but I thought that would be best. That, along with the heater and a couple of plants, should make the fish reasonably comfortable while we change the substrate over anyway. As the water level drops, time to pull out our media from our filter. Toss that in a bucket of water to keep it wet at least while we're doing this. There he is again. I better catch him before he disappears from sight. So we've got Big Bertha, a bucket full of rocks and plants, another bucket full of rocks and plants, and a bucket full of art media. Glad I thought to buy extra buckets, eh? £2 each from the supermarket, so cheap enough. So why is it we're only just starting to catch a fish then? Well, they don't want to be caught, do they? So if we drop the water level as far as we can, it makes it harder for them to jump over the net and get away. They're already spooked, so they're trying to get away from anything that moves, including a big net that they're not going to enjoy. And also, if they do get past us, they're not going to bump into the rocks and wood that we've removed from the tank. Not going to hurt themselves, hopefully. Also, it's less time that they're going to spend in the storage container, isn't it? We work with what we've got. If we've got another big tank sitting about, that's even better. But if we don't, the storage container is a nice alternative. However, we don't want them in there any longer than absolutely is necessary. If we've dropped the water level as much as possible and removed anything that they might injure themselves on, it makes it much easier and much safer for the fish. The plants should be the last thing to come out before the substrate. Once you start pulling them up, it can bring dirt and debris with it and it cloudies the water, which means you can't see what you're doing, including catching the last few stragglers that are hiding in between the plants. If you've ever wondered how well do roots grow through sand, by the way, look at this root mess. Absolutely beautiful, isn't it? But kind of gives an indication that they don't really have any trouble at all. What you might have trouble with is getting nutrients to those roots, but a carefully placed root tab or two can make sure that's eliminated as an issue. Yeah, no problem getting roots through sand, is there? Well, except play sand, I find that compacts way too much, but certainly not aquarium sand anyway. Wee Scarlet Baddis there, look, living all that time with those big fish. I don't even know how he got in there. Once we get as far down as a gravel vac will suck water out, we need to start coming up with other ideas. This is mine. If you know of a better one, please let me know, because it's it's probably not the best, but it's what I had. Now we can start scooping out the sand though. And my first idea was to fill the bags that the granite came out of. But when I carried it outside, it had holes in it and it leaked all over the floor, which Mrs. DKF had views about. And quite rightly so. Also gave me another job cleaning that up before I could get on any further. So we grabbed one of our trusty buckets and scooped that I'd bought specially for this, by the way. I didn't want to use one that I'd been sweeping the floor with. The thing that I want to point out here is when we're scooping and when we're lifting the bucket in and out, we want to be really, really careful not to touch the side of the glass, because if either of the tools have got sand on them, you're going to scratch it, and obviously that's something that we want to avoid at all costs. There was way more sand than I remember putting in, by the way. If you have some sand up against the glass, dig at the bottom and let it fall away, and then just use a wee jug of water to wash it off. Don't rub it, whatever you do, because you will scratch it, and that's what we don't want. With the tank now empty though, we can start filling it up again, can't we? And I always use a base layer of this Tropica clay-based substrate underneath any gravel or anything that I use. It gives the root feeders something to start eating off. Gives us a nice head start, and I've always found that it works really, really well, so I use it in all my tanks. You don't need a lot, just a centimetre or two underneath anywhere you're going to want plants to grow. And now we can start adding our granite chips or gravel, whatever you're using. Again, you want to be really careful to avoid the front of the glass with the bucket and the gravel that we're adding. We don't need to be too exact, we just need to get it in. And once it's there, we can move it about to get it where we want it. Normally, you slant it deeper at the back and shallower at the front. Want to make sure that we cover all the clay-based substrate. Maybe move that away from the edge of the glass if you don't have a trim. Just so you don't see the earth, just so you see the stones that you're using. But I'm liking this much more already, by the way. I've got Big Bertha back in, and I'm adding a couple of accent stones. And then we can start adding water. Mrs. DKF, if you're looking, look away for a wee minute. But yeah, getting some water in at this stage will help the stones to settle, shift into place a wee bit, and we're pouring it into the strainer, because if we didn't, the force of the water would knock stones all over the place and ruin our scape and have them bounce against the glass. Then we can add some more water. And even more water. Honestly, I like being a bucket guy, but this is probably the second time in the hobby I really, really wish I had another option. 45 buckets this is going to take to fill this. And the sink's right at the other side of the house as well. Ah well. More water it is. And this is where I went horribly wrong. Decided I needed to top up a wee bit on granite chips, and obviously added some that I had not rinsed properly, so the whole tank's just gone grey. It's going to take hours for this to clear, but normally this is the point where I show you adding plants. However, I had to add a few of them where you're probably not going to be able to see them anyway, but added plants I did, and now I'm going to continue to fill the tank up. Now, at this stage, I'm going to add my Seachem Safe, and I'm kind of kicking myself because I could have done this way, way earlier, since there's no fish in the tank, right? I don't normally add it straight to the water. I normally add it to a bucket of water and put it in case the fish eat it and get sick. But I could have done that way sooner with no fish in it and saved myself a lot of bacteria, because the chlorine in the water has probably killed a load of it off. So I'm going to need to be careful over time. As you can see, I've added a spare sponge filter over in the back corner there, and that's to try and help clear some of the dust that I added inadvertently. Measure twice, cut once, folks. I'm also going to add some of my filter media a little bit earlier than I had intended as well. I don't count this as my biological filtration though. This is more for polishing, and that's exactly what I need right now. While we are waiting for the water to clear, we can add some more rooted plants, so we'll prepare these ones. These are all individual plants, by the way. I could separate them and plant them individually, but I'm just going to put them in as a wad. So I'm going to chop the roots off. That'll encourage new root growth, and put them in all together. Look at this one. This is a mass here, isn't it? There's actually more plants than I thought there was, but we'll do the same thing. We'll chop these off and plant these in a different position. Just a case then of burying them in the substrate up to the crown, which is basically the meeting point between where the roots become plants. I normally push them in a bit deeper than needed and then pull them out again until I start seeing the roots and stop there. I feel like that anchors roots a little bit better and gives them a place to start growing. I've replanted those and I'm still left with all this left over. Look at that. At this point though, I feel like I've got to start putting the fish back in. I don't want them sitting in that storage container any longer. I deliberately did not feed them last night, just so they're putting a little bit less waste into the box, but it's still not ideal for them. I've added my biological media back to the filter at this point, and yeah, I just think it's time to start letting them get back into their home. It will take a little while for them to feel comfortable. They've had a pretty traumatic day, but I'm hoping it's going to pay off in the long run. A few hours later, fast forward a few hours later, and this is what we're looking at. I'm really, really happy about this. I think it looks so much better. I really do. It is midnight at this point, and I started this at 10 o'clock in the morning. So a wee tip, if you're going to do anything like this, give yourself lots and lots of time, regardless of how much planning and preparation you've done. Yeah, I mean, it's been worth it, but it's been a long day. Will we do a little before and after so we can see the difference? Here we go. This is the before, and this is the after. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess, but I think it looks a lot better. I think the substrate matches the background now, which is obviously the whole point, the whole reason that I did this. You may well notice I've not added the roselines back, and that is a sore point. I always knew when I added the severum, when they grew out, the tank would start to look a little bit busy and be a little bit crowded for all the fish, and was 100% going to set up a separate tank for them, but then this cost of living crisis came along, didn't it, which nobody saw coming. So as much as I do not feel good about it, as much as I'm disappointed about it and in myself, I think they are far better off going on to another fish keeper that's going to love them as much as I did, instead of keeping all the fish in suboptimal conditions. So they are still in the storage container with the heater and the sponge filter. I think I'm keeping them as comfortable as I can for now. And I've lined up a gentleman to come and pick them up tomorrow. With a heavy heart, really heavy heart, but it is what it is. That aside, I think we've been reasonably successful here. I hope there's a few tips for people that might be thinking about trading out their substrate for something different. If you think there's anything that I didn't do so great or a better way of doing things, then please share it. There's always improvements we can make, isn't there? Always a better way of doing things, and probably things I've not thought about here that would make it go a lot more smoothly. Either way, I'm glad I've done it. I think the tank looks much better. The fish are looking like they're feeling much more comfortable already. We're touching off 1 o'clock in the morning. It's been a long, long day. I'm sore. Carried a lot of buckets, washed a lot of gravel, and I think I'm out of here then. Right. Later. Halfway through. Feeling a little less enthusiastic than when I started, I must admit.